Chapter 21. Baker. I blew my nose, washed my hands and continued to follow Puffer's precise directions for popovers. Did you put the pans in the oven already? He asked, frowning over my shoulder as I mixed the dough to a creamy consistency. Yes, sir. They're been preheated. I think we're ready to pour. Mix it hard now, until it's frothy while I fetch the tins. They'll puff a bit more that way. I nodded and whipped the mixture with the ancient whisk until small bubbles rose to the surface after each stir. I scooped the mixture into the pan. Quick, precise, in time to Puffer's nodding head. These had a few extra ingredients than the usual from Puffer's smaller store of weird stuff. He explained what each of them did and how things worked together to create other things. Zebra hoof powder, for instance, worked to rebuild blood cells, but if you added ostrich eggshell to it, you'd have a blood thinner that also increased heart rate and lessened pain. At the same time, he reminded me often that my instincts were always right. Whatever I knew, I had to follow my heart, which would lead me right. My heart was with Orion, so I only nodded and repeated in my mind the powders and their various uses. A sharp rapping came on the door. I looked up to see Armand standing outside, looking a bit more irritable than usual. I looked at Puffer and he gave me a sharp nod before he headed to the door, letting Armand inside and him out at the same time. Puffer didn't like Armand too well. You look better, Vanilla. I paused in rolling out dough to blow my nose, then washed my hands and continued. Thanks. Landry sent over some cold medicine, some soup, but I left it in the car. You're going to refuse it again, right? I frowned at the pale dough, creamy like Orion's skin. I crumpled it up and threw it down on the marble tabletop, turning to Armand. I've been thinking. He cocked his head. Is that strange for you? Orion asked me to be his baker, and I agreed, but now he doesn't want to kiss me or see me at all. I understand that he had some kind of vision or whatever, but wouldn't he still want me to be his baker? If he's going to be rational, he should be rational and insist that while there can be no affection shared, he needs me as his baker if he's going to be as strong as he needs to be to find and destroy my parents' killer. He went to the oven, peering through the glass door and sniffing. He's transitioning. He's not going to be rational. But that's what he used as an excuse to break up with me, rational logic. Can't argue against that because I'm not completely insane yet, but seriously, there's no reason for me not to be Orion's baker. Not unless I'm running away from him and this world, which I'm not. I gave him a pointed look. If you open up that door before they're ready, I will scalp you. So there's no reason for him not to be my butcher. Other than that, he's worried I'll kiss him and put him in another coma. He's not worried about that, he said, sniffing along the counter. Why not? That's rational. I told you he's not rational. He's afraid that he's going to hurt you, not the other way around. Also, he's thinking about the future long-range outcomes, and he sees the two of you having children like your idiot brother, who almost died, watching them suffer, watching you suffer for them, that kind of thing. Don't you have anything that I can eat? I went to the fridge and slid a meat pie I probably dripped snot into the night before across the counter to him. I wouldn't tell Armand. Actually, maybe I would. You can have this, but I think I sneezed on it a few times. Also, maybe my runny nose got into the sauce. He took the meat pie and sat down, cutting it with one of his big knives and eating a big slice with his hands. Armand, you need to wash your hands first. He nodded and got up, washing his hands for a long time very thoroughly, before he came back to the table. Thank you. I gasped. You said thank you. I'm going to have to tell you to wash your hands more often. He ignored me, gobbling up the meat pie instead. After he'd eaten the entire thing, he leaned his elbows on the counter and blinked sleepily at me. So how are you going to get Orion to let you suck the life out of him again? Rationality isn't going to work. He's talked himself into thinking that you're happier without him. He cocked his head. He might be right. It's not easy to be with a butcher, particularly one that's transitioning. He's worse than a curmudgeon. He's a wan, pathetic, whiny, lazy weakling, laying around all the time, barely eating, barely sleeping, simply rolling around in his misery like he can't get enough of it. I sniffed and placed the dough in the pie pan. Armand, can you turn the oven down for me? 200 should do it. Don't open the door or I will chop off your fingers. If Orion was really that miserable, then I had to help him. He would hurt me. He wouldn't be nice to me anymore, so I couldn't go in with my Heart on a platter for him to crush. I had to put Violetta away and go back to being my brother. If I were a boy I could walk into Calder, go down to his man cave and grab him before he knew I was there. I could play the violin for him. I could listen to him talk about whatever bothered him and I wouldn't be part of his problem, his worry. I inhaled deeply. Armand, what kind of clothing do male bakers wear? I mean, interns like me. He scratched his chin. He should probably shave at some point. He was so scruffy. White shirts, black pants, black suspenders, black shoes. What do you have in mind? I smiled at him and he smiled back. I could use a haircut. The Greek will have a lot of fun with this. I think he's missed you being in drag. And Casper might flirt with me a little bit less. He scowled. Casper? That's a butcher waiting for a girl to stab him through the heart. If you're going to play baker's boy, you should probably have some knife skills. I nodded and glanced at the timer. After this comes out, you can help me with that. I can. I shrugged. You did say that you're slightly responsible for me, didn't you? He grinned at me. To tell the truth, I'm slightly fond of your muffins. You have a new cut on your face. The other one on your cheek is healed, but that cut, I said, brushing my finger across his forehead, looks new and like it might get infected. I'm going to put some stuff on it. We'll see if I can. Remember Puffer's instructions. I made a paste, put it on his head while he stared at me, still seeming sleepy. If you're too tired to teach me how to knife someone, you can come back later. The alarm went off and I went to take the popovers out of the oven, taking them out carefully and putting a slit into the bottom for the steam to escape, as Puffer had instructed. Give me one of those and I'll teach you and let you suck the life out of me. Ooh, you know how to really make a bargain. All right. I tossed him a hot one and he caught it in his mouth, snapping it out of the air. Impressive. Come on. We'll spar in the garage. It's mostly empty. Armand got up close and personal, knocking me back until I stood my ground and twisted around him, pulling my knife. He sighed and fixed my hand, not talking a lot, just moving me in the right place. He didn't usually touch me, so it was a little bit weird, but if I were going to transform into Cesario, my male persona, weird was only the beginning. The Greek was delighted to help turn me back into a boy. Armand left me at his haircutting salon. Your hair was really getting some length, but this cut will be easier to wash and wear. Are you going to be a woman every once in a while or stay this Cesario from now on? I shook my head. From now on, at least around butchers. He beamed at me, his eyes bright with tears. That's so romantic, being with him as a man if he can't have you as a woman. I stared at him. It's not supposed to be romantic. Supposed to be practical. But what if he tries to kiss you? I shook my head firmly. We're not going there again, at least not until after this whole transition thing and he chooses to be with me. What I need to be is a baker to help him get through this whole thing. That's what he needs, not more complications. He sighed but nodded. By the time he finished with me, my hair was kind of cool and not pretty. When Armand came in with the shopping bags, he grunted and didn't even complain about having to shop. Why would he? It wasn't girls' clothes. I went into the cramped bathroom and back, ignoring the werewolves in the cage, the girl the same but the guy younger this time and kind of attractive if you like scruffy and toothy. I went in a girl with an edgy hairstyle and came out, bust-bound, clad in menswear. Armand had included a black baseball cap, so that went on top and I looked like I was seriously ready to park cars. Yeah, I looked kind of like a valet in the white button-down and black pants. There were worse things to look like. He'd also gotten me a black backpack and a black coat. He'd really gone to town. The shoes were smaller than I was used to, since I'd stuffed Boss's old shoes with socks, but it was nice not to trip and it was great to have full-size pockets and everything. I walked out as a boy and the two werewolves stared at me like I was an alien. Okay, Baker, now you look natural, Armand said with a grin. Are you going to take my energy before you go back to Candlestick? I was a little bit nervous about seeing Landry again, but whatever. I grabbed the back of his neck and pulled his energy out of him. It would be faster with more contact. I reversed the cap and leaned my forehead against his neck, feeling his pulse race beneath the skin, smelling the wildness and warmth that was Armand, at least between the bursts of noxious energy that I dodged, at least metaphorically, psychically, something. I pulled away and nodded at him. Eat the popovers, I'm taking this with me to Candlestick. I'm going to need it. I headed out the back door, ignoring the shadows that moved around the edges of the yard. You think Landry's going to yell at you? I shrugged. I think that I'm going to yell at him. He chuckled. Really? That should be interesting. I didn't answer him as I walked towards the small hatchback. Vanilla, why don't we take the bike? I turned to Armand and saw him with a motorcycle, an enormous machine that was sleek metal and distressed leather. I walked around it half impressed, half terrified. It wasn't safe, but I wasn't scared. Fluffy, delicate Violetta who Orion needed to protect. I was Cesario, tough baker who could hold his own, or at least who would eventually. Sure. Armand climbed on the front and I hesitated before I straddled the thing, not touching Armand. How did guys ride on motorbikes together? When he took off, I grabbed him around the waist and held tight while he bumped over the yard, down the curb to the street. It was a little less wild on the pavement, but I still grabbed him a couple of times. It was freezing, but the coat was warm, and my old clothes in my backpack would pad me slightly if I fell off the back. At the same time, where were the helmets? If I fell, my head would crack like an egg. I grabbed onto Armand's waist and pressed my cheek to the back of his brown coat. He laughed and went faster like I was encouraging him. I closed my eyes and clung to him until we got off the highway and Armand finally slowed down. I sat up and gripped the seat behind me, determined not to act like a silly little girl. I was tough, so tough. I grabbed Armand around the throat and pulled the energy out of him. He gripped my hand as we coasted up to the gate and he parked with a jerk. You want the driver to pass out? I couldn't take that much energy unless I kissed you. You shouldn't have gone so fast, and you shouldn't drive without a helmet, and you should never let me go without a helmet. Are you crazy? No need to answer that. I swung off the motorcycle, gave him a short wave and headed to the gate. The guy in the gatehouse opened it for me, apparently a lone person on foot. Dressed like a baker wasn't all that threatening. I headed up the long winding drive wondering why Armand had taken me this way, instead of through the back, past the pond of purity. By the time I reached the curve that revealed the front porch, I saw Landry standing in the open doorway, large arms folded over his chest, the CM behind him leaning against the doorway. This was it then. I squared my shoulders and kept my hands down, calm, steady. I nodded to Landry and the CM. Hello. I'm Orion's baker. You can call me Cesario. I don't want to be pampered and I don't want any nonsense. I'm here to do a job, so let me know what you need and I'll try to do it. They were blocking the doorway or I would have gone past them running away. Probably. As it was, I had to stand there while Landry's eyes narrowed. The CM smiled and held out his hand. Cesario, is it? Welcome to Candlestick Manor. Stay as long as you like. I shook his hand and since I was there I took his energy as much as I could pull out of him in 5 seconds. Not a lot, but more than usual. I would do this, weird or not. Landry rolled his eyes. Cesario? That's my middle name. I raised my eyebrows. Probably because you're my biological father. Now that we got that out of the way, we don't need to talk about it again. The CM laughed, low and only for a moment, but it earned a scowl from Landry. He is very clear. He doesn't want any fuss, doesn't want any nonsense, only here to do a job. That's very commendable, Cesario. Please, come in. He stepped back, allowing me room to get around Landry. I walked directly to the kitchen, needing nothing from the CM and nothing from Landry unless he felt like teaching me something useful. I went to the flour bin, almost filled a bowl, then made a well and cracked 3 eggs into it. What was I making? No idea, but I had to make something, so I didn't freak out about Landry staring at me. I worked kneading dough and slicing meat off a goat, making a mess of it until Landry came over and told me what to do, not touching me and not talking about anything else. Focused. Until it was dinner and butcher's boys came in to take trays up to the butchers above. They were having a dinner apparently. I took a plate outside wearing my new coat and sitting in the apple tree. While I ate, I saw Sebastian come out, heard him call me, but I waited until he was under me to call him. Look up, Ba. He looked up grinning. You're back at Candlestick. That will take some pressure off the butchers, not have half of them patrolling the Vespetti's neighborhood. Why are you up in a tree? I climbed down, scrambling quickly, hesitating on a branch 8 feet off the ground before I did a double backflip dismount, landing perfectly. Show off. Fish face. Show me how to stab a butcher. I pulled out a knife I kept in my coat pocket and lunged at him. He had me disarmed in a matter of seconds, but he was laughing. I stomped his instep and brought my elbow back into his solar plexus, which made him laugh a little bit wheezier, but he was still laughing. Nice Vi.
Calme Cesario.
He raised his eyebrows and then noticed what I had on, including my hat. Wait, you're dressing as a boy again? Hate to say it, Cesario. But everyone knows you're a girl. He handed me the knife and pulled out one of his own. I lunged at him, but he grabbed my wrist, twisting my knife back at me while his own knife came into my stomach. He'd somehow reversed it so the handle hit me instead of the blade, which left me gasping and clutching my stomach. It's not about being a boy, it's about being a baker. How many girl bakers are there? Hardly any. So I'm going to be a baker, sex not included. He snickered. If you say so. I'm not sure that Orion's going to buy it, though. I slammed my head into his stomach, knocking him back, knives forgotten. He laughed and rolled on top of me. He was too heavy. Not fair. I grabbed his face and sucked the life out of him, not fast enough, but someday I would knock him out, and then I'd be stuck under him. Him. I should think this through. Get off me, B. You're so heavy. Are your bones made of lead or what? Ugh. You eat too many magic muffins. He sank onto me even heavier. I bit him. He yelped and backed off, checking his arm where I bit him. I sat up, breathing hard, and grinned at him. What? Can't take a baker bite. He frowned at me and rubbed his arm. Are you going through some kind of hormonal imbalance or something? This isn't you dressing up like a boy. Fighting, what's going on? I stood, brushing off my pants. They brushed off really well. Nice. Not me is the point. I want you to take me to Calder. I'm going to see Orion. I have some baked goods to bring him. He frowned at me, still clutching his arm. Man, Caesar, I'm not sure he'll like that. I rolled my eyes. You're such a baby. I'm his baker. If he doesn't like it, he can tell me. No one needs to know that you're the one who brought me to Calder. He thought about it for a minute before he nodded. Okay. I wouldn't normally do this, you know. I'm not betraying him. I patted his head, but I had to reach up high to do it. Yeah, I know. You're in love with him. Let's go. I've got to get back early so I can go running. He scowled. Running? Why? That's not safe. I laughed. Because I'm out of shape. I have to be able to beat you up, little brother. I'd been born 23 minutes before him. He snorted but went with me to the garage and the little black car he seemed to have as part of his butcher's boy position. Nice ride, I said, adjusting the seat so it was reclined, and I splayed my legs out. He shook his head, glancing at me. Yeah, you know, I always thought you were a little strange, but this really proves it. How's Olivia? He was quiet for a minute. She's great. Like Orion, only a woman. He snorted. She's gotten a little bit weird lately, like when we're together. She'll want to hold hands and stare at me. It's kind of creepy. I sighed. I thought you liked her. I do. I mean, she's amazing, but she's kind of a lot. And when she's staring at me like that, I remember that I have a lot of other things to do. I studied him. How does she look at you? He shifted uneasily. I mean, I guess sort of like she loves me, which is crazy, but it's how it feels, and I'm not sure what to do. I can kiss her, but I don't know about the staring thing. I snickered. The look of love. So terrifying. You really are gutless. He frowned at me. It's not easy. I have all these duties more since the butcher found the dead baker, and I don't have time to figure out how she feels and how I feel and what this all means in the greater scheme of my existence. I just want to be a butcher and kill stuff. I try to tell her that, you know, so she knows that I like her, but I'm not ready for the staring thing. But she's just like, I can be patient. This has to be so hard for you. And, yeah, but I don't think we're talking about the same things, and I don't know why she's not mad at me for not texting her enough or calling her or thinking about her all the time. I don't know. She expects so much usually. But now she doesn't. I'm worried. I sighed. Are you worried she'll take it to the next level, or that she'll dump you? My chest tightened at the reminder of being dumped, but I shook my head and focused on the now, on my brother. I didn't have a heart, I was Cesario, genderless baker. Genderless, loveless, with single-minded determination to bake the crap out of the world. That was me, and I liked it. I kind of don't know why she hasn't already. She's not desperate. There isn't a butcher who wouldn't fall all over himself to be with her, except the Butcher, of course. Of course, I said blandly. He kept quiet for the rest of the ride, which meant that he was having second thoughts about this. The thing was, he knew perfectly well that if he didn't take me, I'd take a cab or walk, leaving me unprotected, and that wouldn't go over well. Still, he didn't feel good about it. I almost felt bad for making him worry about his precious Orion, but I got over it. He was my brother. He should beat Orion up for dumping me. I glared at him. You know that Orion dumped me the same day he told me he loved me. He glanced at me with wide eyes, pale green eyes like Landry. I looked out the window. Sorry, Cesario, but what do you expect me to do about it? He smiled at me. I'm Jonathan Daughtry. I don't believe I've ever truly thanked you for your service here on All Hallows Eve. It was nothing, I mumbled. Orion's life isn't nothing. Following your instincts out of pure faith isn't nothing. You are so far from nothing, Violetta. I can't begin to tell you. You've been baking with Landry for some time now. What do you think? I blinked at him. Why couldn't I relax? It wasn't anything he said or did, but I felt like he was watching me, or aware of me, or knew something I didn't. No, of course he did. He was head of all the butchers in the area. I think Landry is a very good baker. Not just a baker either. He's a fantastic cook, chef, whatever. He's really flexible and lets me do whatever I want, which is a little confusing because I'm not sure if I'm messing up, and I know I have a lot to learn, but he's great. And the baking, being a baker, do you think it's for you? I stared at him. His eyes were more golden than Orion's. After only a few weeks I was supposed to know the answer to that, but I did know. Yes, I want to be Orion's baker, and I want to be Landry's in turn. He smiled and pulled out a manila file folder. He handed it to me and I opened it to see a sheet of paper, an account, and a very tidy sum that would set me up with good tuna for life. Probably the good hot dogs too. This will be the starting amount from the butcher/baker fund, so you have the freedom of your choice of school, college, whatever you like. This, he said, pointing to a separate line below, is your weekly allowance during your internship. Is it adequate? I swallowed and nodded. It was much better than any full-time job I could get. Without a college degree, how long will my internship be? He shrugged and tapped his fingers on the desk. Baker's school is usually 4 or 8 years depending on the country. Your position is unique. You started late with official internship, but your mother trained you growing up. I don't think your internship will last longer than a year or two. What we can't teach is the depth of connection that you have with the butcher. Landry and I spent years together, but our connection isn't nearly that remarkable. It's interesting because you connect with so few people. Armand, the former butcher, you connect with him, isn't that right? I shrugged. Armand? Sort of. His energy is all over the place. Yes. His lack of stability is why he can't be a butcher. It's unfortunate. He was very good. I nodded. Right. He spends a lot of time here for someone who isn't a butcher. Yes, since the days of darkness we've needed his particular abilities to be our ambassador to the werewolves. They are flocking to our city daily, some for revenge, but most for safety. The monster who is slaughtering werewolves. He nodded, so terribly serious. Some blame butchers. Why would they do that? They were killed the way that butchers kill things, only more viciously and violently than most of us could stomach. Oh. I nodded and felt sick. Do you think it is a butcher? He smiled mildly. No. It could be a former butcher, a renegade butcher, or a pretender, but no true butcher would put us all at risk in this way. Do you have any questions for me? I stared at him, fidgeting. Maybe why I can't connect very well. Do you? No. He cleared his throat. Landry and I have talked about that. I'm not certain. But I think it has to do with your skepticism. You weren't brought up to believe in energy exchange. You do believe in Orion, not as the butcher, but as himself. I can only imagine that you also trust Armand. I shrug. It isn't that I don't trust you, it's just that you seem so. He smiled slightly and closed the manila folder beneath his hands. His hands were Orion's hands. Busy, inaccessible, and you probably feel that I could be a better father for Orion if I weren't the candlestick maker. I shook my head in denial before I shrugged hesitantly. It was true that the impression that I got from all of our conversations that Orion needed a father figure but didn't have one because the CM had to be his boss instead of his dad. It can't be easy for you, but he doesn't have anyone he can give his Burden to. My dad was always there to give me a hug or tell me good job going. To all my stuff, I don't know. I guess you guys go to butcher stuff together. He shook his head. Butcher stuff, yes. Maybe we could do other things. Baseball games or, he smiled slightly. I have no idea what Orion would like. He's always been so focused and driven to be the perfect butcher. You should take him camping. Not in the dark nights but during the summer. Maybe. Hiking and climbing, canoeing, that kind of thing. He studied me thoughtfully before he slowly nodded. Yes. I'll propose the idea to him. Perhaps you, your brother and Armand could come along. Armand. I stared at him. Oh, that sounds fun. Sure. He laughed, a wonderful warm sound that made me smile. Armand and Sebastian could watch each other suspiciously. Yes, I've never gone fishing before, but I've always wanted to. Landry is a good fisherman. He could come along with my wife. She's a remarkable woman. Landry's sister is her baker. They could both come. I stared at him while I tried to smile cheerfully. And my aunt and uncle. Vanetti. He nodded and started taking notes like this was seriously going to happen. Opened my mouth to suggest that he go camping with only Orion and not with dozens of other people, but he seemed so excited about it. Clearly the CM needed to go on vacation. Also, the CM had issues about being alone with his son. They needed to spend time alone together. I'd have to figure out something because the CM didn't know how to connect with him. Any other questions? He asked, looking up from his camping notes. He was kind of adorable and oblivious about some things. I think I'm good. Are you sure you're okay with me staying here? He looked surprised. Of course. As a baker, you're welcome in any CM's residence. It's a place of refuge for your kind. As Orion's good friend, you're certainly welcome to my home. Good friend? Okay, that was kind of embarrassing. Landry probably told him all about the tablets Orion took so he wouldn't bite me. Great. Thanks. Hesitated before I turned back to him. Did you know my dad? He nodded. Joseph Tancetta. He was a great butcher. Do you know why he quit? He smiled. He retired after serving for many years. He didn't quit, Violetta. He was still listed in our reserve. Oh, okay. What about my mother, did you know her? He nodded, sobering. Lauren was an excellent baker. She assisted Landry in my wife's conception of Orion. I blinked at him. Oh, that's cool. Do bakers usually do that kind of thing? Indeed. Landry will have to teach you the proper baking techniques. The stronger the butcher, the more difficult it is to conceive. That's why children are so precious. Why you're saving those boys is so significant. I wanted to edge towards the door, but this was stuff I should know. Apparently the CM was not self-conscious about that. Well, he couldn't be if he had the whole gang helping out. I blinked rapidly, trying to shut out the images that inevitably arose from such conjectures. I opened my mouth to ask what part of conception was particularly difficult, then closed it again. Just couldn't. I smiled brightly, happy to help. So all my account information is in here. I'll just go now. Thanks. He smiled and walked me to the door, putting his hand on my shoulder for a moment, holding me back. If you ever need to talk, if you need to share your burden, I am always available. He frowned thoughtfully. I suppose I'm not always available, but I'll certainly do my best. I laughed a little bit and nodded, then headed down the hall away from that exciting conversation, only slightly less humiliating than it could have been. The next morning, I focused on taking Mel's energy while Olivia sat beside me, fiddling with her phone, frowning at it fiercely. Such a Valkyrie or Amazon. Whatever. Mel twitched under my hands. Just take it already. I swallowed and frowned at him. The CM thinks I can't connect because I don't believe in energy. It's real, Olivia said, looking up from her phone, then threw it down on the table where it slid across the wood to stop beside a pan. I don't disagree, I said slowly. I just don't accept it and really believe. You know, I think that might be an explanation for what's going on here. But it really doesn't make any sense. But you can connect with Orion. She gave me a pointed look that made me wonder what she'd heard about us. I trust him, not his energy. She took my hands and put them on her cheeks, gazing at me while she leaned close, her voice breathy and her cleavage extremely voluble. Orion agreed to do a double date with your brother. Don't you think that's funny? I nodded and closed my eyes, focusing on the thread between us, The warmth of her hands, the softness of her cheeks, the pulse pounding beneath her skin. Faster and faster until a thread of energy spooled out of her and into me. She gasped and jerked back like she always did once I got started. It was almost as if she were afraid I wouldn't stop. Mal's turn, she said, retrieving her phone. She got up and walked to the pantry, speaking into her phone low. I rolled my eyes and put my hands on Mal's thin cheeks. His skin was smooth, his eyes steady and his energy solid, the little I could draw out of him. Does it hurt? I asked for something to say. If I were supposed to like or trust Mal, I'd have to do more talking with him. Of course not. It's pleasant, like warming my hands in front of a fire. I smiled. That sounded not bad. More energy flowed into me bit by bit while he relaxed on the bench. Where did you grow up, Mal? He nodded towards Olivia, and the way his eyes lingered on her before he quickly glanced down made me kind of ache for him. I grew up in Olivia's house. After my dad died, my mom remarried, not a butcher, so I was lucky they took me in. Where does she live? Florida. Maybe they moved again. I don't know. She had a few more kids that keep her busy, and she works a lot, so she can't really worry about me. I nodded. Harsh. At least when my parents were alive they'd wanted to see me. He sniffed and lifted his nose, looking at me like I was something disgusting. He'd scraped off his shoe. It's very ordinary in butcher circles for children to grow up in different houses. That's cool. Francis, for instance, his dad is a butcher without a house, so he's always staying with someone or other. He has no real home. I nodded. That makes sense. He pulled away from me and stood. I'm staying at Calder from now on. You'll have to practice taking energy from other butchers. That's great news. So you're doing better. Orion will be glad to have you. I sort of wished I could go back to Calder. I nudged him with my elbow, which made him look shocked and offended. I can't believe you're leaving me at Olivia's mercy, not that she has any. You're too cruel, Mal. He looked at me disdainfully. If you can't appreciate Olivia, then it's you who lack, not her. If you like her so much, you should date her. He stiffened like I'd poked him with a pin. Nonsense. She's seeing your brother, and if she weren't, she certainly isn't interested in me. All the same, he cast a furtive glance in her direction. You should write her letters to tell her how you feel. She can't be interested if she doesn't know how you feel. He made a face like he'd bit into a sour lemon and took 2 steps away from me. Your opinion is of little use to me. I cocked my head while I stared at him. I don't know, she fell in love with me after all. He looked scandalized, which I enjoyed while I turned and rifled through the cabinet for some inspiration. Landry came in. We're going to the market today. That way you can get your own peaches instead of stealing mine. Oh, were you going to use them for something? He smiled at me beatifically. Of course I was. I wouldn't have them otherwise. Neither the CM nor Orion complained, however. Come on then. Chapter 14. Butcher. I was almost caught up on my reports when an older butcher dropped a stack of folders on the table in front of the couch. I exhaled slowly so I didn't stab him. What is this? CM sent it over. Stuff about the seals, he said. Thanks, Alfie. So helpful. I stood up and stretched before opening the first folder. Some of them were heavy, the kind of thing they kept old and delicate documents inside. I spent the night poring over those folders, only shutting my eyes for 2 hours and 15 minutes as Violetta had demanded so ruthlessly. Violetta shoved the folders aside and rushed out of the black box, upstairs and almost into malmorning. Everything going well? Good. We'll talk later. I broke into a run, throwing on my coat as I went. I desperately needed to see Violetta and taste her lips. She'd liked the cooking meat on sticks thing. So medieval. We were now officially together dating, and it felt like an enormous step in an impossible direction. I pulled up at Candlestick, but before I could go in the door, my father stepped out and put a hand on my chest, blocking my entrance. CM, what can I do for you? I asked, glancing around him like she might be somewhere hovering in the halls waiting for me to come. Come to my office. I almost sighed and shuffled my feet, but I wasn't a child. When I was a child, I hadn't wanted to do that. Apparently it was catching up to me. Once we'd arrived in his office, I tried to beat him to the point. The seal can't be fixed. It has to be entirely resealed after the other 2 seals are removed. He raised an eyebrow and poured himself a glass of water, then mixed a powder. Into it Landry's orders, of course. What did he need special powders for? Perhaps his health wasn't perfect. What is the powder for? He glanced at me, surprised. Had I ever asked him a question about himself? That didn't involve butcher's business? Probably not. I have no idea. I think that Landry likes to try things out on me randomly. This one is vile. Would you like some? I held up my hand and shook my head. Thanks, no. Ah, he already has you taking nasty substances to keep you healthy for your Violetta. I cleared my throat. He does. So the seals must be recast. They lost many butchers getting those seals on in the first place. He nodded soberly. We can do better than that. We can. He studied me. Of course. We have more advantages than ever before. Technology. He smiled slowly. Perhaps that, but mostly I was referring to your brother. Your butcher's boy and your baker. It's a remarkable little group, don't you? Agree. I frowned sternly. Violetta is not part of my fighting team. Of course she is, Orion. She's the key to the entire thing. You must have noticed by now that she's attuned to you, Armand and Sebastian, and none else. That allows strength of connection that cannot be achieved with further dilution. Perhaps she should stop trying to connect with others. I cleared my throat. What about her defense? He shrugged. I don't believe you'd allow her to practice on our guest. No, I wouldn't. He smiled. Not that it's your place to allow or not allow your baker. Yet, you are her protector as you are the city's. What do you think about camping? I stared at him. In North City? I doubt I'd get much sleep. He laughed. But there was something tight, nervous maybe. Violetta suggested that we all go camping this summer, fishing, hiking, that sort of thing. I've always wanted to visit the Yukons. Violetta wants us to all go camping? I smiled at the thought of her sitting beside me in front of a fire, leaning against me for warmth. Yes, your mother, Landry, Sebastian, Armand, and her aunt and uncle. I took a step back. Mother? Absolutely not. He sighed. You intend to bring her into this family, isn't that correct? Of course, but Mother will not be pleased. That was an understatement. But she has to come to accept Violetta, otherwise Violetta will feel like an outsider like her mother did. We cannot make the same mistakes. It's fine to insist that Mother accept Violetta, a completely different thing. To make Violetta the target of her wrath when she fails to. He frowned at me and I frowned back until I forced myself to look apologetic. Instead, it's bad enough when Landry and Mother rub elbows. Let's see how this Christmas goes and then plan camping. He didn't agree with me, but he did go back to talking about the seals. Instead. Also, he had a new assignment. I need you to travel with that gray wolf, what's his name, east and west to talk with werewolves about the threat and make certain they know it wasn't under butcher orders. Leave the city? I can't leave. I have school. And Violetta. I need to get ready for Midwinter's Eve when the next seal is and find a forger for the seals. Mostly stay with Violetta. He raised an eyebrow. You're the butcher. Who else shall I send? I glared at him, forgetting that I was trying to be appropriately respectful. I don't care. Send Merlot or Casper. Send nobody. The threat is here in this city. Leaving now would be worse than careless. It would be completely idiotic. Werewolves aren't going to listen to me, not when they think that I'm what slaughtered entire villages. He raised an eyebrow. Your job is to make them listen. It isn't only werewolves I'd like you to see, but vampires as well. I would like you to take Voltaire with you. I ground my teeth. You want to send me into the sticks with a werewolf and a vampire to make them all listen to how innocent the first am? I would happily slaughter them all. I am not their protector but their butcher. If you can't see that, then you're completely delusional, old man. I'm not an ambassador, but a dagger. It's what you created and now you expect me to be what? He stared at me calmly while I yelled at him. If you're finished being emotional, I have a list of the communities I'd like you to visit. I took the paper, crinkling from the pressure I put on it. What am I supposed to say? Invite them to the city for safety, and ask them to be cautious and prepare for attack if they choose to stay. That's all. I laughed and ran a hand through my hair. That's all. Great. This will take me a week. Probably. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe normally before I glared at him again. Why? Would you like me to explain the bigger picture? If you don't make alliances and smooth things over, we will be at war. That's what this monster wants, and he'll get it if we aren't very lucky and very diligent. Make alliances? Smooth things over? Since when do I do that? He laughed and shook his head. Since the last village. The one where everyone was already dead. The one where you found a survivor. He'll go with you. 2 werewolves, a vampire, anything else? A bogeyman, a couple wraiths maybe. Some zombies. He frowned at me. Don't tempt me. Orion, this is a serious matter and you will do it as well as possible. If I don't find that you're inspiring trust in our allies, I'll send Violetta along with you. I stared at him while my stomach turned into a solid rock. What? You'll protect her, and therefore make certain alliances are made and nurtured. My heart pounded and my chest felt tight from the effort not to hurl myself on my father and beat him senseless. That won't be necessary. No? It might be good for her. She didn't like being left behind the last time you went. If I go anywhere with Violetta, I wouldn't ever come back. He raised his eyebrows and we stood there. A serious standoff before someone knocked on the door. Enter, my dad ordered, his voice hard and unyielding like it usually was. After talking to me, I half turned and studied the paper, trying to focus on those towns, organize them in my head so I could cover them in the least amount of time. It was one of my father's older butchers, murmuring about a vampire outbreak in a small city to the west. Exactly what we needed. Orion, the CM said once the older butcher had left. You'll need to take a butcher to stand guard while you're resting. Not Sebastian. I nodded impassively. Olivia. He raised an eyebrow. Really? I suppose that makes sense. Very well. I'll inform her. If you like. May I be excused to go see my baker? She might want to prepare something for my trip. He hesitated, mouth tight. Of course. I'll give you 6 hours to prepare. I will prepare my requirements while Violetta bakes. He raised his eyebrows. Requirements. Travel arrangements. I don't wish to waste time. He nodded. My resources are at your disposal. I smiled. Perhaps I should know what your resources are. My father smiled back. Perhaps you should. Violetta was not happy. First she kissed me until I was dizzy with wanting and regular dizziness. Then she set to work pounding on dough, beating the poor stuff into shape while I organized transportation. Helicopters would not work for travel with a werewolf and a vampire. That was a pity. We could take a limo between small towns and a train from the east sector through the city to the west. The butchers had a private car decades old with a nice secure dark compartment for that kind of guest. How long will you be gone, butcher? Violetta pounded particularly hard, jabbing the heel of her hand into the dough. Too long. A week probably. And are you allowed to call me? With a vampire and a werewolf watching? Of course. Olivia could watch the monsters while I took a break, a very short break. I'm sorry. She looked up with a tight smile. Why would you be sorry? I cupped her face in my hands and gazed into her beautiful eyes. I'm sorry that I won't see you. I'm sorry that I won't taste you. I'm so sorry. The word sorry seems next to meaningless. I'm sorry that you're upset. She sighed and slumped against me, forgetting about her dough. I held her heart fluttering against mine, fast like butterfly wings, so delicate and perfect. I don't mean to be upset. I'm just surprised and worried. You said you're going to warn werewolf villages? Will you be safe? Of course you will. You can fight 60 vampires, no problem. I kissed her forehead, brushed her soft eyelashes with my lips, then kissed her cheeks, her nose, finally her mouth. She tasted like honey, so sweet and rich. I held her and kissed her until I sank down on the bench helplessly. She raised an eyebrow and searched in my coat for the nasty concoction. When she poured it, I noticed that her hands were a little shaky. How am I going to live without you for a week? I'm so good at sucking the life out of you. And who will eat my burned biscuits? I suppose there's always Armand. I winced at the thought of Armand touching her taking his energy. If they had a connection, he might turn her if he wasn't careful, maybe even if he was. What about your brother? She stared at me, pale green eyes soft and vulnerable. I don't want to hurt him. I pulled her close for a moment, before I stepped away and pulled out my papers. Don't kiss him and he'll be fine. I tried to focus, but finally I pushed them away and simply watched her movements, strong, graceful, flowing from one task to another as she hummed. Under her breath, maybe Motown. I drank in the sight of her as though she were water and I was heading to a long desert. Landry had disappeared once I came in with the news, either to get away from her or from me. Maybe to talk to the CM about it. What could I say to convince werewolves that butchers were above slaughtering them? We weren't. The only reason we didn't was that we had allied with them against darkness as long as they followed the mandate against harming innocents. I growled and Violetta looked up at me from the rolls she was forming. You growled. Are you a werewolf? I walked over and put my hand on her waist, bending to gently nip the side of her neck. That must be it. She turned in my arms to stare at me, her eyes enormous and very serious. Orion, are you going to be in very great danger? If I couldn't handle it, the CM wouldn't send me. She frowned. He never makes mistakes? That was an excellent question. Was the CM making a mistake allowing me to be with her? Don't tell him that I said this, but the CM is trustworthy. He won't send me out if it's unlikely that I'll come back. Unlikely, but that's not good enough. You have to be perfectly safe. I laughed. Oh, Violetta, I would be in dire danger of death by boredom if I were perfectly safe. Don't worry about me. It's going to be a dull errand. Have to talk to people, warn them of the danger, and offer the city as refuge. Armin's going to love that. She stared at me, eyes bright, lips trembling. So you won't be fighting? I sighed. Probably not at all. I don't know how I'll survive. She buried her face in my chest. Thank you. I felt warm from the inside as I put my arms around her, holding her carefully. So I didn't squeeze her against me too tight. I almost said, I love you, but bit it back before the words were out. I felt it though. Love roared inside of me for this sweet creature who was getting flour and bits of dough all over my coat. I would happily die for her, kill for her, but this was something else. I had to be trustworthy, relatable, charismatic. I had to connect with monsters. For her I would not only deal with the devil but do. Chapter 15. Baker. Orion was gone for 3 days before I called Armand. Let me guess, you need a haircut. I'll meet you by the Greek's car in 1 hour. He hung up before I could tell him that he was completely wrong. It was 4 in the afternoon and Landry was grinding some zebra hooves in the pantry. He'd offered me the opportunity, but after a few minutes of doing it wrong, he took over and ordered me to go and do something fun. I needed to look into classes to start in January. Baking wasn't enough to keep my mind busy, well, not without Orion. I hurried along the path towards the pond of purity and jumped when Armand melted out of the shadows. How are you, Vanilla? He asked, lips curling in what might have been a smile. I tossed him a bag of muffins that he took but didn't immediately consume. That was strange. I'm suffering withdrawals. I need my butcher. He exhaled, eyed the contents of the bag before he threw 2 back and chomped on them. Do you want me to tell you about it? Hundreds of werewolves flooding the city because the butcher moves them with his tales of the evil monster who makes butchers look good. Housing is a nightmare. Most of them don't even know that humans are off limits. I'm having to arrange classes teachers to werewolves. He shook his head and bit savagely into a muffin. It wouldn't be so bad if their expectations weren't so high, but Orion's got them convinced that the city is some kind of utopia. It isn't. Bordertown is a complete mess. We don't have enough cages to keep the crazy werewolves, and the vampires are increasing their numbers almost as fast. Maybe we shouldn't go there if it's so crazy. He stared at me while he chewed and swallowed a dozen muffins. Nah, it'll be good. The Greek's getting cranky. He's mostly in charge of housing. He needs a night off to eat pizza. Cut your hair and remember that he's one of the good guys. I laughed and grabbed his hand. He yanked away violently, making me stumble. Pulled my hand to my chest and stared at him while he ate another dozen muffins. He was going through them like a starving person. I don't have a lot of energy right now for the taking. Sorry. Okay. I should have asked before I touched you. He nodded seriously. You should have. You're a baker. I am a baker. Witnessed by the plethora of baked goods you just annihilated. Aren't you eating? He frowned at me, holding the bag close like he was guarding it. Such a weird guy. Never mind, Armand. Eat the muffins. I won't touch you again. Are you sure? I'll be safe in Bordertown. He nodded but kept a wary eye on me. Yes. There are 2 werewolves in the cage. We'll keep the door shut. Just so you know in case you hear anything. I swallowed and hesitated a step. 2 werewolves in the cage? Great. We walked in silence the rest of the way to the car. My heart pounded as we got closer. You play violin? He asked randomly. Yes. I used to play. Oh. I stared at him. He didn't look like the violin type. He didn't look like the bath type either. We should play a duet sometime. He snorted and tossed a muffin in the air to catch it in his mouth hole. Some teeny-bopper pop song about true love. Or a classic piece. I personally don't know any pop violin. You would have to teach me. He laughed and I smiled as I climbed in the car. The drive went by with his impeccable driving showing that somewhere beneath the crazy firecracker guy was a responsible adult. When we pulled up behind the Greeks, a few shifty-looking guys drifted away. Before I got out, walking closely behind Armand to the Greek's back door. He opened it and walked through the small back room, past the table piled in old pizza boxes and the cage where 2 ordinary enough-looking people sat, one a girl not much older than me, the other a guy closer to my dad's age. I smiled when the girl caught my eyes, but then she pulled her lips back in a snarl and I grabbed Armand's arm, pulling him between me and the wolf girl. Before we were finally in the shop, which was empty. I stared at the empty barber's chairs, the long mirror along the back, and outside where it was starting to get dark and nothing between me and that darkness besides a sheet of glass. Armand flopped into a chair and opened a newspaper. It was 2 weeks old. I perched on the counter but I didn't like my back to the window and when I turned around I couldn't see the door that led into the back room. Armand, I don't think that this is a good idea. He flipped the paper. Get comfortable, Vanilla. You're going to be interested in this. I sat down in a chair next to him so that he was between me and both doors. Were you a very good butcher? I was a terrible butcher. Right, I know, but if suddenly 60 vampires came in through the windows, would you be able to fight them off? He folded the newspaper and turned to me, his eyes golden and amused. Of course not. I would, however, be able to butcher them. Fighting them off means leaving survivors. There's not much point in leaving an enemy to attack you. Another day now is there. I swallowed. I never thought about that. It seems a little bit brutal. He nodded and ate another muffin. I thought he'd finished them off, but it was a very large bag. Butchers are brutal. So are werewolves. And vampires? He nodded. It's a rather vicious world. On the other hand, there are muffins. He tossed another one back and settled into the newspaper. The front door banged open and the Greek came in, carrying a laptop tucked under his arm. I'd expected pizza. Violetta, I've got it. You have? Great. What have you got? It wasn't pizza. He sat down in the chair next to me and opened the laptop, perching it precariously on the arm of my chair. See? These numbers, are they familiar? I blinked at them. I think I've seen all numerals 0 to 9 several times. He nudged me with his enormous elbow. These are the same amounts shifted from you and your brother's accounts. I couldn't follow them, but I could search for them. See? Isn't that brilliant? He nudged me again. If I do say so myself. It's been a long time since I've done this kind of thing. Sort of pleasant to see everything fall into place so nicely. Oh. I gripped his enormous arm. Are you saying that you know what happened to the money? You know who took it? He grinned at me, his face seeming to expand in that enormous bow. That's right. Well, not exactly, but I know what else they bought, and it's right here in the city. I stared at him. My money was used to buy something? What? A building down by the river, north, a warehouse by the looks of the address. Shall we go check it out? I hesitated. Is it safe? Armand and the Greek exchanged glances before the Greek gave me a sheepish smile. Sorry, I guess I didn't think about that. You probably shouldn't go. You wouldn't be safe here while we went, but you desperately need a haircut. He turned and tossed the laptop on another chair as if it weren't worth remembering and came around and spritzed my hair, fluffing it up. You shouldn't let yourself go just because your sweetie's out of town. He's coming back, isn't that right, Armand? Armand had disappeared behind his newspaper and I only heard a grunt of assent. He reminded me a lot of my dad. Can you tell what kind of warehouse it is, like what it's for? No idea, the Greek said airily, pulling out a pair of shears. I doubt it's going anywhere. Armand, do you think you could go check out back for the pizza? Armand folded the paper and got up, leaving me with the Greek. I exhaled and frowned at him. I thought he'd never leave. I love Armand, but he's driving me crazy. No, he's crazy and he's driving, which I'm sure is much worse. Greek, is there any sign of why my dad sent that money? He frowned at my hair, snipping. I have dates, amounts, and destination. But the why you have to draw from your own conclusions. How do you like being a baker? Has anyone bothered you, Orion being gone and all? I rolled my eyes. I haven't seen any other butcher since he's left. He nodded and smiled slightly. Good. Butchers are dangerous. I know. You told me. Top of the food chain. At the same time, he's just so sweet. He took me on a date and there was knife throwing and fires and roasting hot dogs and just everything so awkward and real. It wasn't perfect, which made it better than perfect. And when he kisses me, I think I'm going to die, or I already died and went to heaven. He sighed and snipped some more. And he eats your baking and feels the same way. You made Armand muffins. He's so weird. He acts like I'm going to suck the life out of him any time I touch him. He gave me a pointed look. And why would a sweet girl like you be touching a grouchy bear like Armand? I almost shrugged before I remembered not to move too much, instead sitting up straight. He's one of the few people I can connect with. He inhaled sharply. You mean like butcher-baker connection? You feel that with Armand? What? It's not like it is with Orion. First of all, his energy is all over the place, and while he has a solid base, it's covered in these explosive bursts. Can you get energy from those bursts? I shrugged. Oops. I don't know. He doesn't want me to touch him even though I made him an absolutely huge haul of muffins. What about the CM? He's supposed to feed all the baker's energy, isn't he? I sighed. The CM is okay, but it's still weird. He's Orion's dad, and when I touch Orion, I'm all tingly and glowy and it's amazing, but when I touch the CM, I really don't want to feel like that. When you touch Armand, głowy. I snickered. Oh yeah, no. It's like a drizzle with sporadic bursts of hail. I don't know. I haven't taken his energy and baked for him consistently enough to get a handle on it. Probably for the best. You don't want to see his ugly face any more than you absolutely have to. That's true. Not that I don't love Armand to pieces, it's just a little of him goes a long ways. I am grateful that he's trying to find my parents. Killer. Are you going with him to the warehouse? I put my hand on his arm and he froze, scissors midair while he studied me. I suppose I could. Please don't. Armand can go with some butchers and lots of weapons. I don't want you to get hurt. He exhaled long like a balloon was leaking. That is the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. In that case, I'll stay in and watch that new reality TV show. It's all about real-life hair trauma. The last episode, I haven't seen hair that big since the 80s. I gave him a big hug before I pulled away and sat up straight. Thanks. I've got the pizza, Armand said, carrying in 3 boxes, the top one open and missing half its contents. How do you eat so fast? I asked. He raised an eyebrow. I fed the ravening wolves. You'd rather I threw you in there, vanilla? How much pizza did you need to eat? I snatched the box out of his hands and took a piece, then handed the rest to the Greek. I will fight you to the death for my friends, just share. Armand grinned at me. A fight to the death, you say? The death of what? Your nice new sweater? Is that the sexy one? How about a fight to the death of your atrocious manners? Why don't you cut your hair? You're not a butcher anymore. You look like a lawn someone forgot to mow. You have no excuse because the Greek is the best hairstylist in the world. Armand ate 3 pieces of pizza from the next box, but his heart wasn't in. Probably because of all the muffins he'd already eaten. Vanilla, it's time for you to go home. The Greek's going to take you, but first you're going to take some of my... He couldn't quite say it, flinching on the last word. I sighed and walked over to him. If you don't like it, I won't do it. I'll give the CM a nice neck massage. His eyes glinted and he took my hands, pulling them up to his face while he stared at me as if daring me to pull away. Are you afraid? You do look a little bit like you might be infested, but no, there's nothing about you that a haircut and a container of bleach couldn't fix. And something about my manners, he muttered while I closed my eyes. I focused on his energy, trying to ignore the buzzing layers on top and dig deep beneath into the butcher's energy. At first it came slowly as usual, but After a few minutes it flowed into me rich and heavy like a wave that physically knocked me backwards, buzzing. The Greek caught me, his hands on my shoulders while he looked at me. Concerned. Violetta, are you all right? I smiled at him brightly, a little too brightly, but that energy was coursing through my veins and I needed to bake something. I ducked around the Greek to go into the back room. There was a little stove back there and something Fidesque I could prepare for Armand. There was ramen, a bag of mostly rotten onions and some ancient dried mushrooms and bottles of spices. I pulled a small packet out of my pocket and put a pot of water to boil. Meanwhile I chopped onions and sautéed them, flipping them golden and perfect before I added the packet and spices boiling. The mushrooms and packet of nori. This was going to be weird. Like Armand. Smiled as I arranged the noodles and sauce in a bowl and carried it to the table which had miraculously emptied itself of pizza boxes. Armand stood, staring at me while he tapped his fingers against the wood, everything besides those fingers ominously still. I thumped down the bowl. Eat. It's probably the worst thing I will ever make. Hopefully it doesn't kill you. Greek, can you drive me back? I'm safe with him, right? You'd be safer in a nice cozy grave, the girl werewolf chimed in. I looked at her. That's one way of looking at things. Armand. He stared at me a long while before he licked his lips and glanced down at the bowl. Safe is a relative term. Yes, vanilla. Go with the Greek before some werewolf decides to find out how delicious you truly are. All right then. Greek, are you coming? He came through the door bringing a box of pizza with him. We'll eat the rest on the way. Have a nice evening, Armand, or a bad one, whichever makes you happiest. Not that he's ever happy, he whispered to me as he held open the outside door, gesturing me through. I only hesitated for a moment between the room with a glowering Armand, two crazy werewolves, and the outside where who knew what lurked before I ducked through and followed my enormous friend to the white hatchback that would take me home, back to Candlestick. Chapter 16. Butcher. I stood on a platform at the train station, my very last stop before I'd take the 3 a.m. train back to the city. Olivia stood beside me, arms crossed, looking for all the world like she always stood around on platforms surrounded by werewolves and vampires, the one endlessly moving, the other unnervingly silent and still. Welcome, children, Voltaire crooned, her voice as rich and decadent as vanilla pudding. Not really, but she told me it was, and I didn't argue since my whole purpose was to ride on the wave of her introduction. You've come here tonight to hear about the danger that awaits those who are unwary, and the salvation that comes from those who are prepared. May I present to you the Butcher from the City of Saints. Howls and polite applause echoed through the dark night. I stepped forward, raising my hands to cut them off. They reacted immediately like they were my boys' choir, already attuned to me. I didn't need Voltaire, she simply made things much faster. Speed was of the essence. Just as well, werewolves didn't have the patience to sit around and listen to drawn-out speeches. Friends, brothers, I come to you with a dire message. A monstrous creature, mimicking butchers in brutality, werewolves in cunning, and vampires in subtlety, is striking out, wiping out villages, breaking through our most cherished sanctums and infecting our own butchers. The vampires are next, the peace-loving creatures who seek only to live in the night, free and unencumbered by the cares of the world. For safety I offer my city and ask only that you join our fight against the darkness and the monsters that gnaw on the very root of our existence. If you choose to stay and defend yourselves, know that if you call, butchers will come in defense of your lives, your freedom. I turned to gesture to Tom, the werewolf survivor from the village. Come forward. Tell them what happened. He came, hunched over, face long, ears twitching. It killed everyone. My family, friends. It left nothing but blood, rivers of blood. It ate the bodies. Werewolf bodies. What kind of monster eats werewolves? A shudder went through the crowd. That was a question I'd had a lot of time to ponder. The boy turned to me and pointed. He found me with his brother, pack leader, in his city. I trust him. I smiled at him benevolently before I turned to the grizzled old wolf. Any words? He stepped forward, growling a bit until he had everyone's attention. He didn't like attention. He wanted to lurk in the shadows and rip out someone's throat. Didn't we all? This is a threat we all face. We're none of us friends, but if we don't work together, there won't be anyone to bury the corpses. Well said. I patted his back, something he'd almost gotten used to me touching him without a knife sliding into his skin. I was less accustomed to. The laws must be maintained in the city. If you choose to join us there, you'll have to sign a contract swearing to protect the innocent and cause no harm to humans, as well as keep the peace between all who live there, whether vampire, zombie, or other. These are the same laws you follow wherever you live. You who wish to live your life without any meddling are welcome to do so. I've taken enough of your time. My thanks. I bowed low and, leaving the back of my neck unprotected, except for Olivia's protection of course. I straightened at the moment the train's light beamed brightly down the corner of the track, right on schedule. I stood there, looking reliable and relatable, until the train hissed to a stop, and I stepped into the butcher's car along with Voltaire, Greybeard, Tom, and Olivia. Voltaire at once glided to the box, built into the room with a few reinforced layers to it where she would sleep in perfect darkness, while I was left in the main car with the werewolves and Olivia. I sat down on the couch and leafed through papers, eating a roll. The CM figured that I'd be bored without paperwork. How utterly thoughtful of him. Olivia sat next to me, frowning at her phone. Sebastian didn't text her often enough. She'd muttered complaints every hour for the entire 6.5 days I'd spent with her. He doesn't ever think about me, and when he does, it's not the same. He just doesn't feel like he used to. He's working with the CM in the city during the days of darkness. I'm sure he adores you. She pouted at me. I could tell she pouted even though I didn't look up from my papers. Violetta texts you a few times a day when she isn't busy, mostly to tell me to drink liquids and get enough sleep. Sebastian never worries if I'm taking care of myself. Sebastian is a butcher. A butcher's boy. I sighed and sat up to stare at her. Olivia, if you want a romantic, you should date a civilian. She pouted her poofy lips at me. You don't understand. Explain or stop talking. She lifted a hand to gesture at me. I expect that from you, but Sebastian is so sweet and sensitive sometimes, almost like before when I talked to him and he'd say things that made me feel like a woman instead of a bloodthirsty machine. Now he's so focused on becoming the perfect little butcher, I don't remember the last time he asked me something that wasn't about knives or fighting or how to clean off zombie guts. It's infuriating. The last few days, he hasn't said hardly anything at all. I sighed. All right. So sometimes he's unlike me and that throws you off. When he is like me, Olivia, he doesn't know who he is any more than we do. He's growing into someone. You can hope that he's the same butcher you liked in the beginning, but if he's not, you have to accept who he becomes or accept that he's not going to meet your expectations. She frowned at me thoughtfully. He's growing? That makes sense. I mean, we all change, and the first years as a butcher are very intense. The highs of your first good kill, the lows afterwards, trying not to eat your own arm off from the hunger. You're right. I need to be patient with him and see what happens. I can't get clingy and desperate. I should give him space and let him be himself without so much pressure. I scratched my chin and let my gaze drift back towards the papers. If that's what you've decided, I'm going to sleep for a few. Watch the wolves for me. She flopped over sideways and closed her eyes, fist curled around a knife handle. After a few minutes, I pulled a blanket over her and moved to a different couch across from her. Greybeard sat in a chair staring into space, an empty glass in his hand, while Tom paced the length of the car, wearing a path in the emerald green rug. Thoughts? I asked Greybeard. He looked up with a start and shook his head and rubbed his hand on the back of his neck. Heard some rumors before the big rah-rah rally. Your brother found a new stash full of rebels and renegades by the river and ripped them apart with her lover, he said, nodding at Olivia, who snored gently. I don't have reports on that. No. He shrugged. Maybe no one wants you to run back to your city and make sure your little cupcake's all safe and sound, not until you've finished with this little tour of torture. Why is my glass empty? He didn't get up. He only drank one glass after every rally. He was remarkably methodical for a werewolf. Maybe so. I pulled out my phone and called Sebastian. He answered it on the second ring. Orion, what's up? I hope I didn't wake you. I've heard reports of an attack by the river. Wanted to verify it with you. Oh, the CM didn't think you needed the details until you got back to the city. I'm on my way. We've just finished our last presentation. Oh, that's okay then. Yeah, Armand got some intel into the leader of the renegades and he totally went down to the river. And the butchers were called in. You should have seen him, Armand, he was insane. He was like you, only furry, and everyone followed him like he was their butcher. I mean, he's their pack leader, but I've never seen wolves so disciplined and cohesive. It was scary stuff. Disciplined werewolves? Sounds terrifying. How is your sister? Does she know about that? She's good. I had to give her energy last night. She sucked the life out of me until Landry gave me some stuff. Can't wait until you get back. She's worried about you. You're keeping in contact with her, right? She worries. Yes. Maybe I should do something else. Do you know what she'd like? Honestly, she just wants to see you. What time will you get in? 5 a.m. I have to check in with the CM first. Right. Maybe afterwards you can take a little nap in her bed. I smiled while he chuckled like he was an evil genius or something. About Olivia, how are things? He hesitated. Good. He had no idea. Good. We're going to have that group date this weekend. Yeah, that's good. I laughed. It'll be over and that's the main thing. Get some rest, Tansetta. I hung up and went back to my papers. My mind kept wandering to the attack, to my brother, to Violetta and the fact that she must be feeding him. Could Landry give him something to keep the edge off his hunger? As a werewolf he wasn't equipped to deal with that kind of thing. I frowned at my papers. I did not need to worry about Armand's hunger. He wasn't my responsibility. The only thing I cared about was whether or not he put my Violetta's life in danger. We finally arrived in the city while it was still dark. I woke Olivia and rapped on Voltaire's compartment, then opened the exterior door, watching the lit garages and shops pass by. When we stopped at a small platform, I hopped off, nodding to the older butchers who waited. They would take Voltaire back into custody and deliver the pile of papers to the necessary butchers while I was free to take my car back to Candlestick. I left the top down, glad for the cold in my face and hair, all sensation that screamed I would soon be with my Violetta again. She was waiting for me, wearing Landry's coat, standing on the steps, arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. How long had she waited? I parked in front of her and got out, slamming the door closed before I walked to her, keeping my steps slow, steady so I didn't grab her and crush her into a hug. Before I could get to her, she threw herself into my arms, her hands in my hair, her cheek against my neck, my pulse pounding while I held her, kissing her hair and her forehead, her temple and her ears. She smelled like heaven and felt like home. You're cold. I carried her inside, her arms still wrapped around me. My energy slid into her slow and steady, filling me with a sense of complete peace and contentment. Also exhaustion. I had not slept much, and eating baked goods that weren't from Violetta didn't help. What I wanted was her goods and her sweetness. Orion, you can't carry me through Candlestick. What if someone sees us? Don't care, I muttered, pressing a kiss to her cheek. I needed more. I'm tired. Can I sleep with you? I kept carrying her, but I'd stopped breathing while she pulled away and stared at me, sliding her fingers through my hair as though she couldn't help herself. Like that one night? The horrible one. Without the near death. Hopefully. It's not night, it's morning. I sighed elaborately. That's true. I suppose it can't be like that night at all. How about like the morning? She smiled, slow, sweet and delicious. If you'd like to rest in your bed for a few hours, I can't see anything wrong with that. I'll curl up beside you and protect you from vampires while you sleep. Someone has to do it. I sighed and put her down, resting my hands on her shoulders. It's a heavy weight, but I think you can manage it. I picked her back up this time, carrying her properly in my arms instead of just hugging her. I went at a near run, half afraid the CM would stop me. He should. I had reports to give. But I just didn't care. I needed Violetta, and I'd needed her from the moment I'd stepped on the train headed east. In my room, I went straight for my bed, put her down gently because she'd said it wasn't soft, and went back to the door, closing it but not locking it. I wanted to lock it, but I needed some supervision in case of nibbling on my love. She was so beautiful, curled up in Landry's coat, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes bright and gleaming. As I walked towards her, I took off my coat, folded it over the back of a chair, then sat on the bed and untied my boots. After that, I fell over beside her, my head on the pillow while I looked up at her. She smiled at me, took off her coat and tossed it over mine. She wore a little lacy camisole and flower-printed flannel pajama bottoms. She was far too sweet and lovely to be real. How sweet and lovely. How was your trip? She asked. Tedious, inane, but terribly important. How was your week? I heard about bunch of renegades Armand had the pleasure of slaughtering. She frowned as she studied me. You really are tired. Should I take your energy and go bake you something, or should I stay here staring at you while you sleep? I smiled. I love you. I'd meant to say either way, but apparently I was rendered honest by my exhaustion. She gasped and climbed under the blankets, snuggled against me and whispered, I love you, Butcher. I think that if you ever go off on a mission with Olivia again, I'll poison you. I opened my eyes wide. Really? Are you jealous? She sighed. Not really, but I had to help Sebastian compose a million texts to her. He really has absolutely no clue. I laughed and pulled her closer, her beneath the blanket, me above, which seems so senseless, really. That explains it. Olivia is deeply confused. That's probably the best thing he can do, keep her on her toes. We're still going on a double date. Do you want to do anything in particular? She snuggled closer to me. Do you have to be on top of the blanket? My arm will be cold if I'm trying to hold on to you. I moved, slipping under the blanket and pulling her back into my arms as quickly as possible. Better. She had her head on my shoulders, and she gazed up at me, pupils dilating. I need to kiss you, Orion. I need to kiss you until I forget that you ever went away. I had absolutely no objection to that.